A werewolf has no choice. With each full moon, when he transforms, he no longer remembers who he is. He'd kill his best friend if he crossed his path.
Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel where I cover all kinds of supernatural creatures. It's almost my favorite time of the year and I have some videos planned that I'm excited about, so hopefully all of you will enjoy them. Today we're looking at one of my favorite series of all time, Harry Potter. We're going to take a look at the history of vampires and werewolves in the wizarding world. Their origins, how they're turned, their abilities, the most famous vampires and werewolves, plus much more. Before we get into the world of Harry Potter, this video is sponsored by Aura. They've been a sponsor on the channel for a long time because it's a great service and I actually use it. What is Aura? It's everything you need to protect yourself online. Data brokers are making billions selling personal information without your consent and destroying your privacy in the process. And they make no effort to stop scammers, spammers, and who knows who else from buying it. Well, that's where Aura can help. Aura protects your privacy by identifying data brokers selling your info. Aura then takes care of the hard part, automatically removing your info from these sites and keeping it off. There's a lot of services that offer this too, but none of them offer as many features as Aura for the same price. You get all the tools you need to protect yourself online in one package. You get alerts if your personal info is found on the dark web, real-time fraud alerts for credit and banking, and to help keep you even more safe, Aura has a VPN, antivirus, password manager, and more. And in the worst case scenario, if anything does happen, Aura includes 5 million in identity theft protection. Protect yourself online and try Aura free for 14 days at aura.com/KoganLawlins or click the description down below. In those 2 weeks, Aura will get to work scrubbing your personal info off these data broker sites. Thanks so much to Aura for returning to sponsor another video. Let's start with the vampires of the wizarding world since I feel like we know less about them. Not much is said about vampires in the books or films. We know that vampires are in fact real because Harry studies them in Defense Against the Dark Arts. And Harry does actually meet one vampire in the book Half-Blood Prince, Sanguini. Scenes were filmed for the movie including the vampire at the Slug Club Christmas party, but ended up being cut. You can still see him standing in the background of a few shots. Just to be clear, he is confirmed by J.K. Rowling herself that he is a vampire. However, she felt like there was nothing that she could really add to the vampire mythos because it's already so rich, so she decided to leave most of her vampire ideas out. Vampires are considered a dark magical humanoid being. They are humans affected with the vampire curse. I wonder if the curse came from some kind of spell created by a dark wizard, similar to Inferi, or if it was some kind of affliction passed on from a magical creature. When someone feeds on the blood of a unicorn, they are cursed with a half-life. Maybe to become a vampire, there's another creature you can feed from or kill that also leaves you cursed. It's not clear whether vampires are considered undead like Inferi. There is something called the Society for the Tolerance of Vampires, which must have tried to get more rights for them. This was mentioned in a special newsletter sent to the Harry Potter fan club in 1998 and 1999. Apparently the wizarding world did set guidelines to prevent their extinction. And this is because they were once human, so they fall into the part human category, which is treated much more fairly. Vampires seem to receive much less discrimination than werewolves for some reason, possibly because they are less likely to attack random people or they've had less incidents. In one of the books, Rita Skeeter complains about not being able to stamp out the vampire problem, while Percy points out that that's illegal. Vampires feed on blood, but it's likely they can consume regular food as well. The sweet shop Honeydukes sells blood-flavored lollipops, presumably for vampires to enjoy. In the novel Half-Blood Prince, the vampire Sanguini is seen being very interested in a group of girls. It's implied that young women are his favorite to feed on. This could be the case for all vampires or just him. It's never confirmed whether vampires in Harry Potter are immortal like in most series. Many wizards and witches have been known to live to 100 years and longer. Dumbledore was 115 when he died, and if not killed, most likely would have lived much longer. So given that witches and wizards already live longer than a normal human, it's assumed that vampires would at least live longer than a human, but they could be immortal. It's also unknown if vampires can reproduce. But since vampires are dead or undead, they probably cannot procreate in the usual way. Although, I did find evidence of at least one half-vampire that was featured on J.K. Rowling's website where she posted Wizards of the Month, and this wizard is described as being part vampire, so it might be possible for a vampire to mate with a wizard. It's never explained how someone becomes a vampire, but presumably most vampires were once witches and wizards. They weren't born vampires. It's unknown if a muggle could become a vampire. Usually only wizards become werewolves because they are more likely to survive a werewolf attack. This could also be the case with the vampire curse. We know that werewolves keep their magical powers after being turned, as seen with Remus Lupin and Fenrir Greyback. However, it's unknown if vampires also keep their magical abilities. Since Sanguini appeared at the Slug Club party, I would assume he does still have some magical ability. Or vampires might have unique magical abilities of their own and don't require a wand, similar to a house elf. That's unlikely though. It's also possible that when someone becomes a vampire, they lose their ability to perform magic since they are dead or undead. One exemption to this could be if someone is part vampire, then they might still retain their magical abilities. Though, like I said, Sanguini being at the Slug Club party points to them still having magic. We have no idea what kind of abilities a vampire from the wizarding world would possess. Possibly super strength and speed, enhanced senses, transforming into a bat, who knows. Since the world is so rife with magic, there's a lot of possibilities. Also, if a vampire is undead, I wonder what would happen if they went through the veil under the Ministry of Magic. I've always found this to be one of the most interesting things in the films. As described in the Crimes of Grindelwald screenplay, in 1913 during a Defense Against the Dark Arts lesson taught by then Professor Dumbledore, an unnamed student had their Bogart assume the form of a vampire as their worst fear. When the student cast the ridiculous spell, it made the vampire Bogart take the form of a buck-toothed rabbit. This made me think, we've seen Lupin step in front of the Bogart and it transformed into a full moon. I wonder what a vampire would see if it stood in front of the Bogart. The sun perhaps? It's also never confirmed whether or not these vampires are weak to sunlight or not. We don't know if vampires are weak to silver, crosses, or many traditional weaknesses. It is possible they're weak to garlic because Professor Quirrell said they are. Apparently he had a meeting with some vampires when he was in Romania, and he was so afraid that he now hangs cloves of garlic everywhere, including in the classroom, which is why students complained of the smell in the books. It's possible garlic is just a superstition, but he was a Defense Against the Dark Arts teacher, so he might know something. Gilderoy Lockhart wrote a book with the title Voyages with Vampires about his alleged meeting with the species. The book had information on a vampire that, after an encounter with Lockhart, could eat nothing but lettuce. We find out in Chamber of Secrets that Lockhart was a fraud and took credit for other wizards' accomplishments, then erased their memories. So Lockhart was found to have stolen other people's stories, but not made up stories out of thin air. He's not very good at coming up with stories, which is why he has to steal them from other wizards in the first place. That means this story about the lettuce-eating vampire probably did happen, just not to Lockhart. JK wrote that in her early notes, she had a vampire named Trokar as part of the Hogwarts staff. A Trokar is basically a thick needle with a hollow center inserted into the body to extract bodily fluids or blood, so very fitting name for a vampire. At one point in the story, Luna Lovegood and her father both believed that the new Minister for Magic, Rufus Scrimgeour, was a vampire, and they wrote about it in their newspaper, The Quibbler. They were contacted by the Ministry to remove the story, which could have been simply because it wasn't true, but the Lovegoods took this as a sign that they were correct. It would be quite fitting if Rufus was a vampire, considering the actor Bill Nye played one of the head vampires in Underworld, Victor, although I don't think Scrimgeour is truly a vampire. Here's some vampires from the Harry Potter and the Prisoner of Azkaban video game. In the game, you can collect wizard cards like we see in the movie, but there's not only wizard cards, there's also Quidditch cards, famous goblin cards, and a few others. Among them is famous vampire cards. I will read the descriptions of the vampires. His life was short-lived by undead standards. A Victorian vampire who preyed upon women in London during the 1880s. Was subsequently captured and killed by a special squad from the Department and Regulation of Control for Magical Creatures. Varney is reference to an already famous vampire called Varney the Vampire, who established many vampire tropes that still exist today. Amarillo Lestat, flamboyant American vampire, author of A Vampire's Monologue, intended to bore the reader into a stupor, making him/her easier prey for vampires. Obviously, this is a reference to Interview with the Vampire and the vampire Lestat. This could also be proof that vampires can live longer than the average person or wizard. These dates show that Lestat was 201 years old. Lady Carmela Sanguina, 1561 to 1757, bathed in the blood of her victims to retain her youthful beauty. This vampire is obviously inspired by the legend of Elizabeth Bathory, who was also said to bathe in young women's blood to retain her youth. Bloodwin Blood, 1923 to unknown, so he might still be alive. Known as the Vampire from the Valleys, famous for singing to his victims in a sonorous bass baritone before biting their neck. If this vampire is a reference to something, I'm not sure what it is. Count Vlad Dracul, 1390 to unknown, notorious vampire who inspired the fictional Count Dracula created by Bram Stoker, father of Vlad the Impaler. So that means in the Harry Potter world, Count Dracula was in fact a real vampire. Now, I don't know if these would be considered canon, probably not, but I found them interesting nonetheless. That's everything we know about the vampires, so let's move on to lycanthropy, the werewolves of Harry Potter.
Remus, my old friend.
Werewolves are usually looked down on in the wizarding world. Since werewolves are actively hunted by witches and wizards, they are at much higher risk of becoming cursed. In the late 19th century, the English authority on werewolves, Professor Marlowe Fang, did a full study on their habits. Nearly everyone that was studied was a witch or wizard before being a werewolf, so although it's possible and does happen, it's unlikely for a muggle to become a werewolf. Wizards live longer and are much more likely to survive an attack compared to a muggle for some reason. Professor Forfang also learned that muggles taste different to werewolves, and this could be another reason why it spreads among witches and wizards more than muggles. They are also much more likely to be involved in the capture and study of werewolves, which can also lead to them being infected. The ministry classification for werewolves is 5X, the most dangerous class. The ministry has never been good at dealing with werewolf relations. In 1637, they developed the Werewolf Code of Conduct. Werewolves were supposed to sign it, promising they would not harm anyone and would lock themselves up on full moons. Big surprise, nobody wanted to admit to being a werewolf, so nobody signed it. Later, the werewolf registry suffered from the same problem, so it's an unreliable source for finding lichens. They have been bounced between the beast and being divisions for years because the ministry could not decide if they were human or beast. Eventually, the werewolf registry was closed down. It was often a joke around the ministry that being sent to the werewolf registry meant you were soon to be fired. Of course, of all people, Dolores Umbridge was responsible for an anti-werewolf legislation that made it almost impossible for a werewolf to get a job, so most of them live in poverty. How does someone become a werewolf? Well, you must be bitten by a werewolf on a full moon while it's in its wolf form. Once the saliva of a lichen reacts with the blood of a victim, they will become a werewolf. Turning into a werewolf is a painful ordeal, your bones and body growing and breaking to almost twice their size. Remus howls and yells in pain when he transforms. Unless treated, the person will also suffer sickness for a few days before and after the transformation. In one scene, we see Remus looking a little ill and staring off into the grass, sort of like an animal, and Tonks says it's because the full moon is coming soon. When a werewolf takes its wolf form, it completely loses its sense of right and wrong. They would kill their best friend if they got in their way. That is, unless your friends are animagus, like Professor McGonagall. Sirius Black and all of his friends learned this ability, and when they would take their animal form, they could roam the grounds with Lupin in his wolf form with no worries. So werewolves are only dangerous to humans. You may recall Remus and Sirius fighting, but that was only because Sirius was getting in his way and stopping him from attacking Harry. They once said it was easier to control Remus when they were younger because there was more of them and James's form was a rather large animal. If there are no humans around and they have nothing to do, werewolves will sometimes attack themselves out of frustration and anger, which is why Remus has many scars. They also usually look prematurely aged. It's unclear if it's the physical or mental stress that causes this, or a mixture of both. In the film, werewolves have a bit more of a human-wolf hybrid appearance, but in the books, werewolves are described as looking indistinguishable from a real wolf, although the snout may be slightly shorter, pupils smaller, and a tuft tail instead of a full and bushy one. The easiest way to tell if it's a werewolf or just a normal wolf is the behavior. Genuine wolves are not that aggressive. They will only attack humans in very rare circumstances. But werewolves hunt humans exclusively and are little to no danger to animals, like I said before. People used to think wolves were very dangerous, but this was most likely werewolves being misidentified. There is no cure for lycanthropy, but the condition can be treated to make it easier for the person afflicted. Many potions have been developed over the years to help werewolves, but the most popular is Wolfsbane. This potion, when taken, will allow a werewolf to retain their human mind while transformed, thus eliminating the risk of attacking humans and doing something they might regret. These potions are very hard to make or very expensive, and most werewolves live in poverty, so they go without. Dementors cannot detect animals. That's how Sirius escaped Azkaban. But I wonder if Dementors would affect werewolves. If they don't affect Animagus, I would think a werewolf would also be immune. What about a vampire though? Since they're possibly undead or might not have a heartbeat, Dementors might ignore them. I guess it would depend on whether or not vampires still have a soul or not. According to Gilderoy Lockhart, the Amorphous charm could force a werewolf back into human form. Once again, there is a chance this is a lie, but more likely it's the true story of a talented wizard that had their memory erased by Lockhart. Some people think that when someone becomes a werewolf, they're even vicious in their human form. However, this is not always true. Professor Lupin is very kind and normal while in human form, which is the case for most. However, you do have werewolves like Fenrir Greyback, who try to bite and savagely attack people even while in human form. He also keeps his fingernails sharpened as a form of attack. Like I said before, you have to be attacked by a werewolf in their wolf form in order to be turned. However, sometimes people will take on wolf-like characteristics after being attacked by a werewolf in human form, such as liking raw meat, but nothing too serious. Also, if a werewolf attacks you, the wounds do not heal like normal. Even if the werewolf is in human form, the wounds will not heal like they should and will leave permanent scars. Bill is attacked by Fenrir Greyback and remains scarred for life. Fenrir Greyback leads a group of werewolves that fought for Voldemort in the Second Wizarding War. They believed that under Voldemort they would be treated better, but this didn't seem to be true. Most Death Eaters looked down on them, and they were not even allowed to have the Dark Mark, so they were basically just used as a way to threaten and intimidate people. The name Fenrir refers to a monstrous wolf in Norse mythology, sometimes called the Wolf of Ragnarok, whose father was none other than Loki. The name Remus also has a connection to wolves. The legend of Romulus and Remus, the twin brothers, sons of the god of Mars and a mortal woman. They were abandoned in a river, but rescued and fed by a she-wolf and eventually discovered and raised by a shepherd. Romulus eventually killed Remus and went on to be the first king of Rome. When it comes to killing a werewolf, they also don't seem to have any traditional weaknesses similar to vampires, so you can kill them just like any other witch or wizard. As for abilities, werewolves might have a slight better sense of smell if you're someone like Fenrir who's tapped into his werewolf side, but they don't seem to have any extra strength or speed while in human form. Over the years, Muggles have created a lot of myths and legends about werewolves, but they're actually not weak to silver. Silver does have its place in the lycanthropy lore though. We learned that when someone is bitten or attacked, the wounds don't heal properly, and if it's a large enough bite wound, the person will die quickly. A mixture of powdered silver and dittany can be used on a fresh bite wound to seal it off and prevent the person from bleeding out. Although the person can survive, it's not a cure for lycanthropy, so it's not uncommon for people to beg to die rather than become a werewolf. Usually werewolves reproduce by attacking someone and turning them, but werewolves can reproduce with other werewolves or humans. Most werewolves refrain from trying to have children due to fear of passing on their condition. When Professor Lupin had a child with a wizard, the child was born a normal human. There's actually no evidence that lycanthropy can be passed down through birth, so why lycans fear having children is a bit strange. Although we don't know what would happen if the mother was a werewolf instead of the father. It's also unknown if Professor Lupin's child just got lucky, and there might have been a possibility of him being born with the curse. If two werewolves mate, it's presumably the same as when a witch or wizard mates with a werewolf. But there is something special that can occur with two werewolves. If they mate on a full moon while in wolf form, their children will be very special. Instead of human children, they're born as wolves permanently, but have human-level intelligence and they're not aggressive toward humans. This is extremely rare and has only happened twice as far as anybody knows. One of these litters of unique werewolf pups was allowed to live on Hogwarts grounds under extreme secrecy by Dumbledore. Rumors spread of werewolves in the forest, and the teachers never tried to dismiss the rumors because they knew there was no danger, and it kept kids away from the forest. It's said some of these werewolves are still there today.
Eat. You'll feel better.
Before the end of the video, I wanted to share some fun facts. One of my favorite actors, Bill Nye, plays the Minister for Magic Rufus Scrimgeour. And you might also know him because he played Victor, a vampire elder in the Underworld movies, and Davy Jones from Pirates of the Caribbean. The actor Robert Pattinson plays Cedric Diggory, but also plays a famous vampire from Twilight, Edward Cullen. This is unrelated to vampires, but I thought it was kinda cool. The actor that plays young Gellert Grindelwald in the original movies is the same actor who portrays One in the 4th season of Stranger Things.
Ridiculous.
Harry Potter is one of my all-time favorite series, so I hope all of you enjoyed and maybe learned something new. Remus Lupin is such a special character, and I really like what they did with werewolves in Harry Potter, although I do wish we got some more vampires. Prisoner of Azkaban is one of the best Harry Potter movies in my opinion, and the Bogart scene will always be one of my favorites. If I missed anything, please let me know, and if there's any other movies or TV series you think I should cover, leave it in the comments below, as I always read them. The people that watch my channel give the best suggestions, I swear. I have a long list on my phone of all the stuff you guys have recommended me to watch. If you enjoyed, leave a like, and maybe hit that subscribe button if you haven't. I really appreciate it. As always, an extra big shout out to all my members for supporting the channel. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.